welcome back. It is Mr. Hartman here again with Section 3 of Cold War Social Science, and today we're going to start the section concerning the era of Nikita Khrushchev in charge of the Soviet Union. We're going to talk about the secret speech in Hungary, and then in the next video we'll go into the relationships with the United States during the Khrushchev era, at least the beginning of the Khrushchev era. So, we're going to start with the secret speech where Nikita Khrushchev addressed a closed session of the 20th Party Congress in Moscow. This is in his role as the first secretary of the Communist Party. This occurs February 25th, 1956. And this will become known as the secret speech. And in this secret speech, he denounces Stalin and accuses him of betraying Marxist-Leninism. And the main way he did this is through his campaign of terror in the mid to late 30s, where he arrested 3.5 million people, killed 688,503 citizens, and countless others endured torture that was sanctioned by the government, supported by the government. And he used this torture to extract false confessions of engaging in anti-Soviet plots. And this speech kind of is like a bombshell within the Soviet Union and the satellite states, because it really upends this heroic image of Stalin that had continued to be promoted by the government since his death in '53. And yeah, so it really, really shakes up the international communist movement and led directly to domestic reforms within the Soviet Union that were collectively known as de-Stalinization, which is a slight move to more liberal civil rights and political rights, well, not political rights, but civil rights for the people, which we saw a little bit in the literature section with Pasternak. The idea here is that Khrushchev is attempting to rehabilitate Marxist-Leninism, right? Basically, Marxist-Leninism has been taken over by Stalinism, and so because of that, it has been painted internationally in this really negative light of, look what Marxist-Leninism gets you. You get this murderous campaign of terror, when in reality, he's arguing that's not Marxist-Leninism, that is Stalinism. This is a really big risk by Khrushchev, but he had apparently calculated out. It absolved Khrushchev from his own responsibilities during that time and during his rule, and allowed him to consolidate his own power base by distancing himself from old guard officials such as Vyacheslav Molotov, who I believe was the foreign minister for Stalin, and he was one of the kind of gang of five that were trying to rule together, and then Khrushchev took over. But this also opens what is proverbially known as Pandora's box, right? You never know what you're going to get in there. Because it invites a larger questioning of Stalinism within all the nations in the Soviet orbit. And we're going to talk about two right now in this Hungary section. In the Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe, this denunciation of Stalin ignited hopes that more reform could be achieved within the satellite states, and in particular Poland, where the Communist Party's top official died from a heart attack after reading the transcript of Khrushchev's speech, implying that he died because he read the speech. I don't know. But he, is a Stalinist, right? So he's really worried about his role within the political system there. And so we see a huge wave of popular protests in Poland, which led the party to expel all of the Stalinists within its ranks and restored the imprisoned Władysław Gomułka as their leader. He had been imprisoned in Stalin's purges in the 30s, maybe even later than that. And Gomułka was very wary that if they went too far in liberalization and reform, that this could lead to Soviet intervention. So he held off the Soviets' attempt to not only reverse his appointment and intervene militarily by convincing Khrushchev he had no intention of challenging Soviet hegemony within Poland. Hungary is a different story. In Hungary, Khrushchev's speech, the secret speech, brought a lot of popular anger because the logic went, if Stalin's terror was criminal, then the similar political repression by the Hungarian Stalinists was also criminal. And so late October of 1956, we see massive demonstrations that erupted across Hungary that escalated quickly into an uprising of almost all of Hungary against Soviet domination. We see students knock down statues of Stalin, and then we see striking workers in the capital city of Budapest clash with Red Army soldiers. And in Hungary, they demand a wide range of democratic reforms, and they especially demanded the return of their former leader, Imre Nagy. And so party officials within Hungary quickly brought him back as prime minister to hopefully kind of end the protests. And what Nagy pledged is anti-Marxist Leninism. He pledged to restore multi-party rule in a radio address, and then also called for the withdrawal of Soviet troops. But the most important thing he did is that he announced Hungary's exit from the Warsaw Pact, the alliance of the Soviet states, and called on the UN to preserve its neutrality. So he's kind of aligning himself with Yugoslavia in this way. Again, Yugoslavia is a communist nation that is not part of the Warsaw Pact, and so he's trying to kind of maybe lean himself more to there. Khrushchev, of course, as a way to, he can't abide this, not only because him personally, but also politically, he'd look incredibly weak if he let them go. And so the morning of November 4th, 1956, Soviet tanks roll into Budapest and easily crush the rebellion. And nobody really noticed because the international community was focused on the Suez Crisis at the time. We see 20,000 Hungarians killed, and we see 22,000 arrested for participating in the counter-revolution. This included Imre Nagy, who would be executed 2 years later in 1958. We also see many of the survivors flee Hungary and become refugees, about 200,000 Hungarians. And one of the most striking things about this is the way the Eisenhower administration responded is in that they did nothing to aid the Hungarian rebels. Even though they had these daily Radio Free Europe broadcasts that were very pro-democracy, but frankly, there was nothing he could do short of full-out war, right? And so the failed Hungarian uprising underscored the U.S. officials. The United States had accepted the Soviet Union's hegemony over Eastern Europe, right? There's nothing they can do about it. Because if they tried to do something about it, that could lead to retaliation from the Soviets, which could have then, of course, all the way extended to nuclear war. So they were not going to touch it. And we also see that Khrushchev's exercise of that Soviet power, very Stalin-like, signaled the limit of de-Stalinization, right? You can only go so far with it, right? If de-Stalinization is going to lead to the counter-revolutions in these Soviet satellites, then you can't really de-Stalinize, right? And in fact, they talked about here, his actions in Hungary are exactly what Stalin did in many other places. But that's going to do it for this video. The next video, we'll go over the different ways that Khrushchev interacted with the United States during this time period in Rome. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in